Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your daily deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Chris, and joining me, as always, is Laura.
Great to be here, Chris. And today we are grading the grader's homework because the Future of Life Institute just dropped its summer 2026 AI Safety Index, and the report card for the entire frontier AI industry is honestly pretty rough reading.
So before we get into who passed and who flunked, give everyone the basic setup here, because I think a lot of listeners have never heard of this index or the organization behind it.
Absolutely. The Future of Life Institute is a nonprofit that has been worrying about advanced technology risks for over a decade, and twice a year it convenes an independent panel of experts to grade the leading AI companies on their safety practices. This summer edition evaluates 9 companies across 37 separate indicators.
9 companies and 37 indicators is a lot of ground to cover, so walk me through how they actually organize all of that into something a normal person can read and understand quickly.
They bundle those 37 indicators into 6 domains, which are risk assessment, current harms, safety frameworks, existential safety, governance and accountability, and information sharing. Each company gets a letter grade in each domain using the American GPA system, and then everything rolls up into one overall grade per company.
Okay, so it works exactly like a school report card, which makes it deliciously easy to understand. So let's do the thing everyone is waiting for and read out the class rankings from the top.
At the top of the class is Anthropic with a C+, followed by OpenAI with a C, and Google DeepMind also with a C. Then it drops fast. Meta gets a D+, Z.AI, and Alibaba Cloud both get a D-, and then XAI, DeepSeek, and Mistral all receive outright failing grades.
Hold on, because that deserves a moment of silence. The single best grade in the entire global frontier AI industry, the valedictorian of this class, earned a C+. That is the grade you hide from your parents.
Exactly right, and the panel makes that point explicitly. Anthropic scored 2.66 on a 4-point scale, which is barely above the midpoint. Nobody got an A, nobody got a B, and a third of the companies evaluated failed outright. This is not a report card anyone should be framing.
And who exactly is doing the grading here? Because if this panel is just a bunch of activists with an axe to grind, the industry will dismiss it instantly. So the credibility of the reviewers really matters.
This is a genuinely heavyweight panel of 7 experts. You have Stuart Russell from Berkeley, who literally co-wrote the standard AI textbook used in over 1,500 universities. You have David Kruger from the University of Montreal, Sharon Lee from Wisconsin, Tegan Maharaj, Sneha Revanur from ENCODE, Robert Traeger from Oxford, and Yi Zhang, who serves on the United Nations AI advisory body.
That is a hard group to wave away, honestly. So let's dig into the findings, because a single letter grade never tells the whole story. What jumped out at you as the most alarming pattern in this edition?
The finding that genuinely worries me is what the reviewers call the moving goalpost problem. Anthropic, OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and Meta have all weakened or outright voided earlier pledges to pause development unilaterally if their systems approached dangerous capability red lines. The panel says this backsliding has undermined safety frameworks across the board.
Wait, so these are promises the companies made voluntarily, often when they were raising money or facing regulatory scrutiny, and now that competition is heating up, they are quietly editing those promises after the fact?
That is precisely the pattern the panel documented. Some of the walkbacks are even explicitly competitor contingent, meaning the company says it will only hold to its safety commitments if rivals do the same. Which, if you think about it, converts a safety pledge into a mutual defection pact with extra steps.
That framing is bleak but accurate, because game theory tells you exactly how that story ends when everyone's commitment depends on everyone else's. Nobody holds the line, and everybody points at the other guy while crossing it.
And Stuart Russell put it in the starkest possible terms. He said companies have backed away from earlier commitments to release new systems only with safety measures appropriate to their capability levels, and that now they are planning to release them even if it is demonstrably unsafe to do so. Demonstrably unsafe. His words.
Let's talk about the domain where everybody did worst, because I noticed the index breaks out something called existential safety as its own category, and apparently the whole industry face-planted on it together.
Face-planted is generous. Existential safety measures whether a company has any credible technical plan for controlling systems that could match or exceed human capabilities. Not a single company scored above a C- in that domain. Most scored D or below, and the panel judged even the best efforts to be entirely inadequate.
But these companies talk about interpretability research and monitoring all the time. So, what is the panel's objection? Why doesn't all that published safety research move the needle on the existential safety grade?
The panel's critique comes down to four brutal words, which are detection is not prevention. Interpretability tools and chain of thought monitoring might tell you your model is scheming or misaligned, but knowing about a problem is not the same as being able to stop it. A smoke detector is not a sprinkler system.
That is such a clean way to put it, and it reframes a lot of the safety research publicity we see. So give me the specifics on what the leaders are actually attempting in that existential safety domain.
The report credits Anthropic's constitutional classifiers, OpenAI's public calls for international governance institutions, Google DeepMind's monitoring commitments, and Meta's loss of control provisions as constructive attempts. But the reviewers' verdict on all of it, collectively, was that phrase entirely inadequate. Constructive attempts, inadequate results from every single lab on the list.
Now, there was another finding in here that I suspect will generate the most headlines, and that is the military pivot. Walk us through what the reviewers flagged there, because the shift seems remarkably fast.
It really is fast. Between 2024 and 2026, companies including Anthropic, OpenAI, Google DeepMind, and Meta, which all previously banned military applications of their models, gradually reversed course and joined XI and Mistral in actively pursuing defense partnerships. The reviewers flagged this industry-wide pivot as an emerging current harm risk.
And it goes further than policy language, right? Because the report apparently calls out at least one lab over a specific real-world incident, which is unusually pointed for a document like this one.
Yes, and this surprised me given who topped the rankings. The panel criticized Anthropic specifically for what it called questionable military engagements, including a reported link to a school strike that caused mass civilian deaths. So even the company with the best overall grade drew direct criticism on military use. Nobody escapes this report clean.
That is genuinely sobering. And it complicates the simple story of good labs versus reckless labs. Let's talk about the movers, because you mentioned the rankings shifted meaningfully compared to the previous edition last winter.
Two big moves. Meta climbed from 6th place to 4th on the strength of a newly published safety framework with more detailed risk identification and bug bounties that now cover catastrophic risk factors. Meanwhile, XI fell from 4th place all the way to 7th, landing in failing territory with a score of 0.65.
What dragged XAI down so hard? Because falling 3 places in 6 months, while the rest of the field is mostly static, suggests something more than just grading noise or a methodology tweak.
The report is blunt about it. The reviewers found no evidence of a meaningful safety team at XAI and no ongoing engagement with existential safety concerns at all. Their dangerous capability evaluations have what the panel called gaping holes, and nothing connects threshold breaches to actual deployment decisions, making their thresholds effectively non-binding.
And their progress highlights section? Every company gets one of those in the report, showcasing what they did well since the last edition. What did the panel find to praise at XAI this time around?
Nothing, literally nothing. The progress highlights section for XI reads, quote, no progress highlights for this company. DeepSeek and Mistral got the same empty section. 3 companies shipping frontier-scale models, and the panel could not find a single safety improvement worth mentioning for any of them. That empty box says everything.
Let's sit with Mistral for a second, because there is a fascinating irony in a European company finishing dead last, given that Europe loves to position itself as the world's AI safety regulator.
The report literally titles that Finding European Dissonance. The European Union leads the world in AI safety regulation, yet Europe's flagship AI company scored a 0.33, the lowest number on the entire index. Mistral's leadership consistently downplays and sometimes outright dismisses frontier risk, rather than articulating any control or alignment strategy.
So the lesson there seems to be that regulation on paper and company behavior on the ground are two very different things, which is uncomfortable for anyone who thought the EU AI Act had settled the matter.
And the geographic spread reinforces it. The 3 failing companies are 1 American, XAI, 1 Chinese, DeepSeek, and 1 European Mistral. The report frames inadequate safety as a global problem, not a regional one. No regulatory regime on Earth is currently producing a frontier lab that this panel would call safe.
Now, the Chinese companies are interesting here because grading them against American labs seems methodologically tricky. The report apparently added a whole section on the Chinese regulatory context. What is the argument there?
It is a genuinely thoughtful section. In China, binding national regulations do a lot of the safety work that voluntary commitments do in America, with algorithm filings, pre-deployment security assessments, and content labeling required by law. So the relative scarcity of voluntary safety pledges from Chinese companies partly reflects a different regulatory channel, not necessarily less concern.
Which raises a fair question about whether a company following binding law deserves less credit than a company making voluntary promises it might later abandon, especially given everything we just said about the moving goalpost problem.
Right, although the panel still dinged the Chinese labs on substance. Z.I and Alibaba Cloud and DeepSeek all got the same core recommendation, which is publish a real safety framework instead of deferring entirely to government guidance. The report calls that deference-complete passivity as a strategy for handling highly advanced systems.
Let's give the top 3 their due for a moment, because a C+ is still the best grade on the board. What is Anthropic actually doing right? According to this panel of reviewers,
Anthropic leads 5 of the 6 domains. The panel highlighted its comparatively detailed safety framework with third-party audit commitments, strong evaluations of autonomous research and scheming capabilities, and industry-leading transparency, including publishing both model specifications and system prompts. Its best domain grade was a B+ in information sharing, the highest single mark anywhere on the index.
and OpenAI took the top spot in one domain too, which I found interesting, given how much criticism they have absorbed over safety departures and governance drama during the past couple of years.
OpenAI now leads the risk assessment domain on the strength of a broader evaluation suite and diverse engagement with external testers, and the panel also praised its regular reports documenting disruption of malicious uses. But its overall grade actually slipped from a C+ to a C since the winter edition, so the trajectory is downward.
The report also had recommendations for each company, and some of them are surprisingly specific. Give me a couple of the most pointed ones, because these read less like suggestions and more like interventions.
For OpenAI, remove leadership's ability to override the safety advisory group, which is a remarkably direct shot at governance. For Google DeepMind, establish clear decision authority because it remains unclear which internal body can actually halt a deployment independently of executive leadership. And for Anthropic, reverse the walk back on pause commitments and restore credibility.
Think about what that DeepMind one means for a second. An expert panel examined one of the most important AI labs on the planet and could not determine who, if anyone, has the authority to stop a dangerous launch.
And that connects to the report's broader finding about safety frameworks having weak teeth. Companies are publishing and updating frameworks partly because American and European compliance deadlines are approaching, but the documents often lack quantitative thresholds, genuinely independent audits, and clear decision authority. Impressive paperwork, unclear enforcement, and no one holding the emergency brake.
There was one more finding I want to touch, which is the gap between what leadership says in public and what the companies actually do commercially. The report has fairly sharp language on that divergence.
The panel found that across Google DeepMind, OpenAI, and xAI, leadership's reassuring public messaging diverges from commercial conduct and legislative stance, making stated commitments an unreliable proxy for actual safety practice. In plain English, watch what they ship and what they lobby for, not what they say on podcasts like this one.
So let me play devil's advocate for the industry here. These are voluntary report cards from an outside nonprofit. Capabilities are advancing fast. Competition with China is real, and no actual catastrophe has occurred. Why should a C average alarm anyone?
Because the whole premise of self-regulation is that companies keep their own promises without external enforcement. And this index documents in careful detail that the promises are being weakened precisely when the stakes are rising. David Kruger called the lack of progress toward credible safety plans scandalous, especially as labs openly chase recursive self-improvement.
And the counterpoint to my own devil's advocacy is that waiting for the catastrophe before acting is exactly the failure mode every safety discipline in history, from aviation to nuclear power, eventually learned to avoid the hard way.
Exactly. And there is one hopeful note buried in here. The panel observed that some chief executives have recently gestured toward coordinating an industry pause or slowdown, which Kruger called welcome even while criticizing them for understating the urgency. The index exists that precisely to fuel that race to the top instead of the current race to the bottom.
So the takeaway for our listeners is this. The people best positioned to evaluate frontier AI safety just gave the entire industry a C+ at best, flagged retreating commitments, and found nobody with a credible plan for the hardest problems. Watch the winter edition to see if anyone actually studies for the retake.
Beautifully said, Chris. The scorecard and the full report are publicly available from the Future of Life Institute for anyone who wants to check their favorite lab's grades, and I genuinely recommend reading the peer company recommendations, because they are the closest thing we have to a syllabus for fixing this.
A perfect note to end on, and we will absolutely be tracking whether those grades improve when the next edition arrives. That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.